I've got so much to get to, so no mucking around. Particularly, I want to start with a potential major change to the way aged care is going to work in the country. Now, as you know, a couple of weeks from now, we're set to have the Dunkley by-election. The main centre in Dunkley is, of course, Frankston, beautiful Frankston. We look forward to taking a pub test there and doing plenty about that by-election. The latest polling, however, that has come out today suggests that Labor will be able to hold on to the seat. Now, they currently hold it by about 6%, but most likely the polling that apparently is coming through is about 52-48. Now, what's really interesting about this is that when it comes to by-elections, there's kind of everyone's a winner way to spin these things, which is if the Liberals win it, then obviously the government's in a world of trouble. If the government holds on to it, they'll turn around and say, well, it's all just made up bunkum from that bloke at Sky News at night. We're great, we're sitting pretty, and everyone agrees with us. But the reality is that the margin will matter. Now, if it's an exact repeat of what happened in 2022, the Libs are in trouble. I'll be the first to say it. But if it is even 52-48, that would be a significant movement towards the Liberal Party away from the Labor Party. And if that was actually to be repeated, then 7 seats that Labor currently hold in the federal parliament would go if the election was the result that they would get at the general election, which, remember, can happen as early as August this year, all the way through till about the middle of next year. So there's a full sort of 6-month period of time from August on when an election is due at some time in Australia. Now, 7 MPs, if the government lost that, well, obviously the majority is only about 2 or 3 seats. So if they lost 7, they'd go into minority government. The Libs would not be anywhere near the number of seats to be able to go to the crossbench to beg to become the government. So the reality is that there would be a minority Labor government. And we all saw with Gillard and then Rudd again in 2010 through 2013, that's a disaster. Now, people inside the Labor Party, well, they hope that if they go into minority, it's only 1 or 2 seats. Because you see, the assumption is that Rebecca Sharkey from Mayo in South Australia, that Andrew Wilkie from Tasmania, well, they at the very least would probably back the government in with not too much pushing. Helen Haynes, who is the independent member of Indi, would do the same. So that gives them 3. If they really want to start to stretch things, well, does Bob Katter go with the people who had the most amount of seats? Again, that's 4 before they start having to go to the Teals. Now, most likely the Melbourne Teals would end up backing the Labor Party, the Sydney Teals, maybe not. But even then, once we get to the Greens, well, we all know what's going to happen there. So the likelihood of a minority parliament going with Labor is pretty much the most likely outcome out of the next federal election. But a minority government, make no mistake, is a disaster for the country, and that is something that Peter Dutton noticed today when talking with my mate Andrew Clennell.
Well, it's a 6.3% seat, so a 3 or 4% swing against Labor would be devastating for the Prime Minister.
But there is a big piece of information that may well make that a much bigger swing and potentially put the seat in full danger. And then, as I say, if they lose that and the sky's falling in, analysis becomes part of the game. Well, I want to talk about aged care, because there isn't a person amongst us who will not have to deal with this for ourselves or, before that, of course, the people that we love the most in the world. And remember, I told you very late last year and again when we came back after summer, the federal government is planning to make major changes as to how much you are going to have to pay when it comes to aged care. Now, wealthy, of course, does not always mean money in the bank. Wealthy does not always mean shares that you have in your portfolio. But increasingly, there are plenty of people who would like your house to be considered as an asset that you can sell to help fund your aged care. Now, I want to go back to where this story was when it was first leaked selectively, when they hoped everyone else wasn't looking. But we did, and we paid attention, and I got a huge amount of response to this. So the people who are right on the verge of aged care will be thinking about it in the next few years. Pay attention. The Federal Government Task Force, which, by the way, is chaired by the Minister, so she's not going to pretend that this is some independent report. Now, it has advised the Aged Care Minister that the best way to reform the service means testing is going to have to change. Now, this is to improve equity. Now, equity is not equality. Remember, equity is the equal outcomes. So everyone in aged care in the same scenario, in the same situation, not one where you would be able to be able to have a better standard of care instead of be the same as everyone else. This would also mean that they can put more money into a system that costs about $30 billion a year. Now, 96% of care costs in residential aged care are paid by taxpayers. 4% comes from user contributions because an individual's means-tested payments are capped at about $33,000 a year, or for how long somebody is in acute aged care. That's about $78,500 total. Now, here's where we get the change. Here's where the nervousness kicks in. Those thresholds, as well as how the family home is counted in the means test, would be reconsidered under the task force advice. Remember, the minister is chairing it, but she's going to pretend that it was an independent body. It's not, it's hers. The system counts the family home only to a maximum value of $198,000, meaning someone with a property worth $300,000 is assessed the same way as somebody with a home worth $3 million. So presumably a scenario where an awful lot of people who are thinking about aged care in the next few years, or maybe the next 10 years or so, may well be living in property that is worth $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million. Now, you may well have bought this property for an absolute fraction of that. Now, it's not $3 million that you have in the bank, but are we about to change the aged care system where the worth of your home is what you are going to have to put on the line because the government says that's the way to pay for your aged care? Now, this government is absolute about trying to get a scenario where if you've got a 3-bedroom home but it's just you and your husband or wife that are in the 3-bedroom home, you should be out of the 3-bedroom home. They want you to downsize. They want everyone living in 1- 2-bedroom units because they want those houses to become available to the people who are the next generation coming through with their kids. But as I can hear you through the television, you've worked hard to pay off that house. You've worked in the garden for how long? You've paid how much money for the renovations that turned it from the place that you bought for far less into the place that, yes, one day when it's sold, will be worth an awful lot more money. But the two things are linked because that report saying that the family home over $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, $2.5 million could end up becoming a major picture in how you pay for aged care into the future will move votes. Because as much as it's all currently a lot of noise and distractions about $15 tax cuts, and the mean income in Dunkley, by the way, would get just $14 a week in those tax cuts, every single person at some point is going to end up in aged care. Your house becoming an increasing part and how that's paid for, that could move votes. Now, when that story that I just read to you was first suggested to the Sydney Morning Herald in the middle of summer, the expectation was that this thing would be revealed by the end of January. But as we know, January has come and gone. No report released. Why? Because the Dunkley by-election was announced during that time. So they've got the report, the minister knows what the report, and the media was leaked about the report last year, but they haven't released it when we expected it in January. We're halfway through February, and again, no word whatsoever on this particular report. And you can imagine the same silence will continue all the way till the 2nd of March, when that, of course, is the Dunkley by-election. So I must say I read with some concern the reporting of Philip Coorey in the past couple of days, where he has linked the delay in the report about how you will pay for aged care and whether your house counts a little or a lot, therefore to the need to sell your house to pay for aged care, and how much of that money that is taken as a bond from the sale of your house you'll be able to draw on for the length of your aged care, or when it's no longer needed, what may well be passed to your partner or to your family. The Albanese government will no longer say when it plans to release its review into reforming the aged care system, prompting speculation it's been shelved until after the March 2 by-election. Now, if there is any Liberal that is watching us in Canberra tonight, let's get some questions in the Parliament when it returns for another question time. Do not play the game where we are going to play the spin, where the decision has already been made, it's already been leaked to the papers, when they hope nobody else was looking so they can turn around and say it's already been put into the public. If they have the report, why hasn't it been released? In the report, can they confirm or deny that means testing of the family home when it comes to aged care is part of the plan? Wait, watch and see, because if Philip Cooley's right, and he so often is, no report for the rest of February, no report until after people get the chance to send the government a message. And if the message is one where the Labor Party, by winning the seat, is going to be able to pretend to say all criticism is invalid, then I guarantee you they will go ahead with the changes, and they may well even be more hubristic about the way they make their decisions if they believe that they can do no wrong. But if you ask me, that plan has got a lot of wrong, and people are going to get mighty annoyed about it, and rightly so. Now, as we know, housing and negative gearing has been the conversation after the broken promise about the too little too late tax cuts that came out just a couple of weeks ago. Now, again, the government is trying to tell us to believe the exact words they used before they decided to change the tax cuts that you had already voted on in 2019 and 2022. Here he was today, Grim Jim.
It's not something that we're considering, Andrew. No, it's not. It's not something that we're proposing. It's not something that we're working up.
So do you believe the guy who can't say no, hell no, and I'll resign if it happens, the guy who's going or do you believe the guy who said this about how negative gearing needs to change?
But any housing policy that doesn't deal with negative gearing and capital gains tax is a sham. Housing affordability, which doesn't make important and considered changes to capital gains and negative gearing, has a hole in the middle of it. If you want to deal with housing affordability, you need to start with negative gearing and capital gains.
Now, where will they probably land? They'll probably land in a scenario where, if you've got one or two, it'll be okay, but anything beyond that. But that's an opportunity for the Liberals to turn around and say there'll be no cap on negative gearing, because after one or two, as long as you put it into something that's guaranteed to be rented for 5 years, 10 years, then you can continue to use the tax system. But watch this space. There's some wiggle. They're ready to move. And if they think they can get away with it because of Dunkley, because the too little too late tax cuts, which remember do not even kick in until July the 1st of this year once the legislation is formally passed, well, guess what? That will end up being a greater political problem. But wait, watch and see. Meantime, the media, of course, is doing all it can to try to get a quick follow-up after its win on the too little too late tax cuts. Have you noticed I've come up with a new name for them? Because the reality is $14 a week is too little too late. Last year they took $1,500 off you, which is why I keep talking about this. The story was running around in the Channel 9 newspapers about the number of MPs and the number of MPs who had investment properties. Of course, no way of criticising the Greens for doing exactly the same thing, but here we go. Meantime, the Canberra Times is, they're profiling a whole bunch of letters to the editor that say it's long past time to address the issues of negative gearing. See, this is what the public desperately wants. The same, of course, in The Age. The parties need to act on negative gearing. And even our friends over at Channel 2 are giving advice about how the system can be changed. What did I tell you on Thursday? The climate policy and the tax policy of Shorten that you rejected in 19 has been implemented after the Labor Party was put into power in 2022. Now, it is going to be the negative gearing policy as well, meaning Bill Shorten gets all the policies without the office, and the better salesman is the one who gets to sit in the office and tell as many lies as he wants because the media will cheer him on. That will be fun to watch.